everybody? C4 here, welcome back to the channel. And the Philadelphia Eagles just closed out their regular season, playing our backups against the Giants starters and still beating them 20-13. We're going to give some post-game grades and reactions to this performance and what we're able to take from this performance. We're going to talk about Saquon Barkley not going for the record at home against the Giants, which would have been a perfect fairy tale ending to this season that was. We're going to talk about Tanner McKee. Is he our own Nick Foles 2.0? Potentially. And we also figured out who the Philadelphia Eagles are taking on in the first round of the playoffs next week in the wild card weekend. It is going to be a week 1 rematch from Brazil against the Green Bay Packers. So first thing is first, the Saquon Barkley record. My take's kind of been beaten into the ground by a lot of people that as a fan, I want him to go for it. As somebody that definitely sees this as a Super Bowl winning team with the capabilities of doing that anyways. And watching last year where A.J. Brown got hurt, and then he missed the Bucs game, and our passing offense was just not great. I get it. It's one of those things, I get it. It sucks. It's lame. It's a smart thing to do. The smart thing to do, the right thing to do is not always the fun thing to do. And it is what it is, because I just imagine Saquon Barkley breaking the record all-time, number 1 above every other great running back. And he did it against a team that, in front of the world on HBO, is like, no, we don't want him. Not worth it. Like, and it's a rival. And it would have been cool. It would have been cool, but it wouldn't have been the smart thing. Because I think, yes, in a vacuum, Saquon, if we just send Saquon out there, and everyone's talking like, well, what if Saquon gets hurt playing for that, right? Which is true. But I think for me, like the thing that at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm all right with it. I'm not going to hold this against Nick Sirianni. Maybe if we're 1 and done, Green Bay beats us next week, and it's like, oh, so we just passed up on the record against the Giants so that our team could come out flat and ice cold against the Green Bay Packers. That's what we're doing. Like, I'm going to hold that against Sirianni. I'm going to completely go off in the video, and you won't want to miss that. Win, lose, or draw next week. But it's the fact that if you play Saquon, you have to play the rest of the starters. So now you're magnifying the amount of players that you can't get hurt being on that field at the same time. It's kind of like, all right, I get it. It is what it is. Still sucks. You know what? Hopefully we go on and win the Super Bowl this year. This week was our first round bye, if you will. We're going to get rested. And you look at Green Bay, they got beat up. I think Christian Watson is probably going to miss their game. He's their wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, deep threat, however you want to put him on the depth chart. And then Jordan Love left the game with an injury. So, like, Green Bay's kind of limping into this one. And we're going to be rested at home. You feel pretty good about that. And if we can go on and do something, it just maybe that's something we do next year. Hey, Saquon, how about in 16 games, in meaningful games next season, you go and we try to get, 21-06 or whatever it is. Now, for this game, Tanner McKee, we were all excited. Talked about it last week. All the sickos that watched the Eagles preseason games, we knew that Tanner McKee was a baller. We knew that Tanner McKee probably should have been backup quarterback. It was a needless trade to go get Kenny Pickett from the Steelers. Even though me personally, I'm on the side of like Kenny Pickett's kind of like Vinny Curry. Like, grew up an Eagles fan, now gets an opportunity to play for the Eagles. The Commanders game was not particularly great, but while he was playing last week, did some good things. Did everything you could be happy with a backup quarterback. I think Tanner McKee could have done the same thing and not cost us our draft pick. But I'm not going to outright hate on Kenny Pickett because he's kind of living the dream as an Eagles fan. But the point being is that he's only here because we gave up some draft picks, and it would have been ideal just to have Tanner McKee be here as our quarterback too and keep said picks. But no matter what way you kind of break it down, Tanner McKee did get the start here today, and I made a tweet. I was close. He went 27 of 41. I did not think we were going to throw the football this much. 269, 2 touchdowns, no picks. My prediction was 15 of 21, 265, 3 touchdowns. So we were close. We were in the ballpark for that one. Awesome player. Is he Nick? Now, that's not fair to him. That's not fair to Nick Foles. Nick Foles is an all-time legend. You got a freaking statue outside the stadium. However, he's built like Nick Foles. The dynamic of the offense changes when he's in there the same way that Nick Foles was. Not to say for the better, but it's just a different offense. And Tanner McKee can operate. And I feel like you don't want to talk about hypothetical injury situations because that is the nature of when you bring up any discussion point with a backup quarterback. But I will say, people could come calling in the offseason. And I always would have been a lot more inclined if someone wants Kenny Pickett, take him off our hands, we can recoup that draft pick. Absolutely. But I mean, for the right price, if you're looking at Tanner McKee, 25 years old, you gotta remember when he came out of Stanford, he was like a top 10 quarterback recruit when he was coming out of high school. Was the season before Stanford stunk the joint, Stanford football program just fell off a cliff. He was getting mocked in like the first round. So there was a point in time in Tanner McKee's college career that he was considered a first round quarterback. So the fact that you've seen this limited, like there could be teams right now that are going to be outside. They're not going to be able to get Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders next year, and Drew Aller from Penn State doesn't declare. They might be like, hey, I'm not going to throw a pick out there, but if someone comes out to you with like a late second round pick and say like, give us Tanner McKee in a fifth and we'll give you our second, like, in crazy hypothetical, who knows? I have no idea what his value is going to be, but I can tell you from watching him play football that Tanner McKee is better than some quarterbacks that were starting this week and last week, and maybe even some that were starting week 1. So I think for Philadelphia Eagles, we know the value, maybe more so than any other franchise in the league, of a backup quarterback. It would have to be something impressive for me to try to trade away Tanner McKee, because what I've seen is a very wide receiver friendly quarterback. Struggled a little bit today when he got blitzed, but that's probably likely to the fact that we played our entire second string offensive line against the Giants starters. Brian Burns was out there the whole game. Kayvon Thibodeau was out there the whole game. There's a player there, man, and I love Tanner McKee. I'm happy that he's getting this opportunity. And the Mormon Missile, I feel like right now, at minimum, what we could say is that if he ever has to get into a game for any length of time, for as long as he's here, I think it's fair to be optimistic. I will just say that. Overall, grades for McKee, I'm giving it an A+. Awesome player. Running game was kind of non-existent. Is what it is. Will Shipley had a couple nice runs, but there just wasn't really much get going there on the offensive line. For the receivers, so I'll give them D. For the receivers, Johan Dawson started at wide receiver 1. First time that he's not buried behind the depth chart. 7 catches, 94 yards. So obviously, fair to say the return on investment for Johan Dawson, very similar to Kenny Pickett. It's like, are we really getting the value of what we gave up for picks? Probably not. But it is nice that, like, in an opportunity like this, where, like, if you look at this game, you look at who's starting wide receiver, you're immediately saying, let's see something out of Johan Dawson. And we saw something, man. He had like felt like he had the same route. He won it 3-4 different times, and it was just working all the time for like 12, 13, 14, 15 yards. I mean, if that's something that he can kind of niche out in the playbook, and Jalen Hurts can get through his progressions, which is something he needs to work on a little bit more, faster, and can all right, Jahan's open. All right, Jahan's open. Not so much just chuck it to A.J. Brown, which first world problems for the Philadelphia Eagles roster when it's like, any other team's like, just throw it to A.J. every time. Just throw it to Devontae Smith every time. For us Eagles fans that are incredibly spoiled, it's like, hey, can we maybe go through the whole side of the field? Maybe Johan Dotson's open to the other side. Maybe give him a couple opportunities. Dallas Goedert had 55 yards in the first quarter. Good to get him some reps out there. But I mean, ultimately, it is what it is. A couple drops for sure. Dallas Goedert had a drop. There was a missed throw in the flat. Tanner McKee had Kenny Gainwell, which would have been a touchdown. Sucks that he missed that one. It's probably just a lack of chemistry thing. But I think overall, as an offense, considering it was backups versus starters on the Giants side, I mean, they're missing players, obviously. No sexy Dexy out there who's an absolute game wrecker. But it was the best the Giants had versus the Eagles backups. I think the fact the offense operated as cleanly as it did today, overall, B+, strong B+. Looking at the defense, this is where we got a lot of looks. 17 tackles from Burks. Like, when I was watching this, I knew I was going to make this video. I was like, who's not standing out? Because everyone there was out there getting on. Isaiah Rodgers had a couple big tackles. Jordan Davis probably had his best game of the year. It is what it is. Context matters. But I don't know. He had 2 or 3. It says he has 1 TFL. I felt like he had at least 2 or 3 TFLs. A couple big ones. Was unblockable. Keely Ringo made some great tackles. One on special teams. I thought Jeremiah Trotter Jr. was a mixed bag for a rookie. Decent tackle numbers. Was around the football a couple times. I remember when he shot the gap. And I think it was Tracy in the backfield. And he just whiffed. Where someone like Zach Bond makes that tackle. Jacoby Dean likely makes that tackle 10 times out of 10. But I think the limited reps we've seen from Axeman Jr. makes you think pretty good about him being a guy that could potentially develop into a starter. And same with Burks. I mean, Burks came over after getting torched by, was it the Super Bowl? Yeah, it was, because Greenlaw got hurt in the Super Bowl for the 49ers. Burks is the guy that got stepped in and got picked on. So when we brought him in, it was like, oh, great, we're getting the worst guy on the field during the Super Bowl. And he's been primarily special teamer, backup. But the last 2 weeks, he forced a fumble last week. And this week, all around the football. I don't think you can be too upset about what we're seeing from our depth linebackers. And a cold, hard truth around the linebacking room is if Zach Bond ends up all-pro, which I don't see another linebacker that will have. There's not a linebacker. There could be name value, but usually all-pro. Trust what's happened every year. He needs to be an all-pro. And if Zach Bond ends up becoming an all-pro, could price himself out of A, what the Eagles can afford, B, what Howie Roseman values linebackers. You know, that's a rough relationship with that position. So if that worst-case scenario does happen, which will be brutal, and there will probably be a yelling video to follow, I mean, with Burks and Trotter, you feel like, you know, Nakobe Dean definitely caught on this year. How much is Dean elevation with Zach Bond playing next to him? And if Zach Bond's not there, do we have the same Nakobe Dean? Who knows? That's a wild hypothetical. But what we do know is Nakobe Dean, in a vacuum, we feel pretty good as a starting linebacker. And I think with Burks and Trotter, I think Burks is only on a one-year deal anyways, but I think we've seen optimism out of Trotter that if he has to somehow, some way, he becomes linebacker 2 in the offseason. I've seen enough I think he's played probably about 2.5 games to be like, you know what? Pretty decent. I don't necessarily think he'll be a liability. He's only going to get better. This is the starting point. This is the floor for him. I really want to see where he can go. But my initial point here on the defense is who wasn't standing out. Bryce Huff played the whole game. This is our big defensive free agency signing. And I made a tweet saying, like, what if somehow, some way we can't re-sign Zach Bond? We can't afford to pay Zach Bond. And, like, it's like one of those things where it's like because we paid Bryce Huff last year, we got nothing going against a terrible Giants team, terrible offensive line. And, like, I don't even think he made, I think all these 3 tackles were, like, almost gang tackles. Like, incredibly disappointing. And, I've evolved as a content creator in this space to, like, not just be a hater for the sake of being a hater. You know, Jalen Reagor's no longer on the team, et cetera, et cetera. So I want everyone to do well. And it's like, you know, I'm at a size of a content creator that, like, sometimes I know for a fact that, like, you know, players will see my stuff. I can tell you right now, Brandon Graham blocks me, so he saw something at some point. And I don't want, like, Bryce not to ever look at this and be like, oh my God, man, these, you know, F that guy. He says I always want to be somewhat constructive and see the positive in things, and maybe the injury to Bryce Huff and yada, 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 et cetera, maybe we'll be better next year. But at the end of the day, easily the worst piece of business Philadelphia did in the offseason. And if Bryce Huff, who was incredibly disappointing yet again here today, for a game that I was optimistic that there's going to be an opportunity. If Bryce Huff could finish with a sack and a half, couple pressures, couple TFLs, we get that confidence rolling a little bit. Didn't see anything out there again today, and it's one of those things, man. You know, if Philly can't re-sign everyone we want to re-sign, when we got Milton Williams and Zach Bond and Mekhi Becton, and then you see Bryce Huff commanding the salary and salary cap hit that he does, it's a rough situation. And, you know, the last little bit of rough situation, Jake Elliott missed a 39-yarder. He got 2 or 3. I like the fact that we were settling for field goals late to try and just see if we could spark any bit of confidence. Yeah, the weather sucks, but we see Graham Gano nail a 50-plus yarder, and it feels like Jake Elliott is shaky regardless of range. It doesn't feel great, especially you're going to the playoffs where Jake Elliott going into this year, like if it loses any other year in his career, I'm like, hell yeah. Any kick, I trust him to make it. 60 yards, 55 yards, 63 yards, wind, no wind, send him out there. He's going to make it. This year, he is easily the biggest question mark, the biggest worry for me going into next weekend's matchup against the Green Bay Packers. Speaking of, we have the first matchup. As a reference point, this was week 1 in Brazil. 34-29, high-scoring affair. Jordan Love, I mean, you look at that, Jalen Hurts, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Saquon went off. A.J. Brown, they had a tough time covering both of the receivers, honestly. Saquon had a great receiving touchdown. Zach Bond was excellent. 2 sacks, 15 tackles. A couple TFLs there by Nakobe Dean. 2 sacks, Zach Bond. I mean, the D-line, you know, you'll love to see maybe a little bit more production out of all those guys. But ultimately, this was a game that we look back on and, like, started incredibly slow. That was, like, the kind of big negative takeaway. Like, the whole first quarter, Philly did nothing, and our defense bailed us out time and time again. Then eventually we got into a rhythm. We were able to close that game out. Also, Jordan Love left that game. We thought, honestly, there was a chance that it was like season-ending injury for him. Able to bounce back, which is great because you always want to see good young players stay in and have nice careers and nice seasons. Anytime you get like an ACL, you never know. It's always a you never know. So happy that Jordan Love was able to play. Played today. against the Chicago Bears. Let the game due to injury. So his health is definitely going to be a question mark. Josh Jacobs had a nice game. Jaden Reed had a huge, I think it was was it a trick play or something like that? It was like a screen pass or something weird. But it was really, other than that, we kind of held them in check for most of that game. You look at their defense, got a couple sacks, corner blitz, Rashawn Gary, he's a tough matchup against pretty much anybody. But I'm going to be pretty much honest with you, regardless if it was the Green Bay Packers or the Washington Commanders, I was kind of hoping for the Commanders just so that you could just put them out of their misery next week. They are high and mighty after beating us after Jalen Hurts missed 90% of the game at their backyard. It would have been real fitting to have this hyped up. We got the rookie quarterback, offensive rookie of the year, yada, yada, yada. And then you just put them out of their misery at home. That would have been funner. Now we got Green Bay. Very rare you get to play and try to beat a team twice that's outside of your division. It's never going to be easy because I do think these teams are similar in regards to the fact that they're hot and cold offensively. If Jalen Hurts gets into a rhythm and the run game gets to a rhythm, look out. If Jalen Hurts starts slow, who knows how long it takes him to get out of the rep. He usually does, but it could take a half. I think the same thing for the Green Bay Packers. If Jordan Love starts hot, it's going to be tricky. They can spread the field even without Christian Watson. He did have a touchdown that game. If he's going to be out, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Tucker Kraft, those guys are playmakers. Josh Jacobs, great running back. One, top 5, borderline, if not definitely top 10 running back in the league. I'd say probably closer to top 5 than he is top 10. They got playmakers. They got dudes on defense. No Jair Alexander. I think that's going to be a big loss, especially when you're trying to shut down arguably the best 1-2 wide receiver punch in the league. I think A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith are absolutely going to feast. I think that's, and we're at home. We're at home. It's going to be a hostile environment. And at minimum, it's fair to say there's going to be a banged-up Green Bay Packers team coming into town. It won't be easy. No playoff game is. But very optimistic about the Eagles' chances in one. Love to hear what you guys think about that one. What do you think? Philly versus Green Bay. You worried? You happy? You excited with that matchup? Would you rather the Washington Commanders? Let me know in the comment section below. But that will do for me today, guys. I will see you back here next week after this rematch. And hopefully we're on the winning end. And if we're on the losing end, you're not going to want to miss it. So I'll see you then. If it is your first time stopping by, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button for more Eagles content. We're going to be following the rest of the playoff run here on the channel. So stay tuned for that one. Until next time, it's your boy C4. Say peace out. Love ya. Have a good one.